Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, July 25th. Today is day 293. There's lots of updates to give you today. Vice President Harris issued a statement that was sent out specifically to Jewish Americans that are on a list that the White House keeps in response to the protests that I talked about yesterday that were at Union Station, protests that were in response to Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking at Congress. The statement by Vice President Harris said, yesterday at Union Station, we saw despicable acts by unpatriotic protesters and dangerous hate-fueled rhetoric. I condemn any individuals associating with the brutal terrorist organization Hamas, which has vowed to annihilate the state of Israel and to kill Jews. Pro-Hamas graffiti and rhetoric is abhorrent, and we must not tolerate it in our nation. I condemn the burning of the American flag. That flag is a symbol of our highest ideals as a nation and represents the promise of America. It should never be desecrated in that way. I support the right to peacefully protest, and let's be clear, anti-Semitism, hate, and violence of any kind have no place in our nation. I just was interested that in the Washington Post reports that I read yesterday, and I had read those, there wasn't mention of the burning of the American flag. There was not mention of pro-Hamas graffiti. And so I did not do a deep dive to see how prolifically that was reported in the news today, but wanted to be sure to share that statement by Vice President Harris. The U.S. says that they see no role for Hamas in the governance of post-war Gaza. A spokesperson from the State Department yesterday referred to the announcement that came out of China. I talked about that. Fatah and Hamas met in China to talk about coming together to form a possible unity government. Hamas is a terrorist organization, something that we obviously made clear before October 7th, but when it comes to the governance of Gaza at the end of the conflict, there can't be a role for a terrorist organization. That's from Matthew Miller. Hamas has not renounced terrorism. It has not renounced the use of violence to achieve its political aims. So no, we do not see an organization that believes in those tactics. He went on to say, if you look at the death and destruction and Hamas's decision to launch the attacks of October 7th, there's no one who has brought more pain and suffering to the people of Gaza than Hamas through their decisions, first through the launch of the attacks on the 7th, and then their ongoing decisions, which continue today, to hide among civilian communities and to use civilians as human shields. That is from the U.S. State Department. There was a shooting attack from a passing car that wounded 3 Israeli soldiers near the west, in the West Bank city of Kalkia. That was reported by Yet News. An Israeli Defense Force officer was injured in a car ramming, and then he actually died. That was Captain Ariel Topaz, 24 years old. He was one of 4 off-duty soldiers who was wounded by a car ramming attack that happened near a bus station at a military base in central Israel on July 14th. So he passed away of his wounds today, according to the Israeli Defense Forces. That was reported in the Times of Israel. The Jerusalem Post reported that Palestinians in the West Bank attempted to launch rockets at Israel. They were members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad from the Tulkarm area in the West Bank. That was reported on Channel 11 News. The Guardian's Chris McGreal published an article today about U.S. medics who volunteered in Gaza and how they demanded an arms embargo over unbearable cruelty, that's their language, inflicted by Israel. I wanted to be sure to highlight this article. Doctors and nurses say that the death toll is more than 92,000 in Gaza, and they described gruesome injuries and a sick and traumatized people. Dozens of U.S. doctors and nurses who've worked in Gaza have written a letter to Joe Biden claiming that the true death toll from Israel's month-long assault is higher than previously reported, and they demanded that the U.S. withdraw diplomatic and military support for Israel until there is a ceasefire. There's an 8-page letter. You can find a link to it from this Guardian article that was delivered today and addressed to President Biden, the First Lady Jill Biden, and Vice President Harris. And it said the medics saw evidence of widespread violations of law and the use of U.S. weapons that have been supplied to Israel, and the ways that international humanitarian law has been violated in the use of these weapons. 45 surgeons, emergency room physicians, and nurses who volunteered at several Gaza hospitals over recent months laid out what they described as, quote, massive human toll from Israel's attacks on Gaza, especially the toll it has taken on women and children, end quote. Today at the White House, Netanyahu met with both President Biden and also Vice President Harris. They were joined by members of families of hostages who are held in Gaza who traveled with Netanyahu. A diplomatic source said one of the objectives is to move forward the agreement outlined for the release of hostages. The Associated Press reported, from a proud Jewish Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the state of Israel. That was a quote from Netanyahu to Biden at the start of the meeting. Biden thanked Netanyahu and joked that his first meeting with an Israeli Prime Minister, Golda Meir, in 1973 was soon after he was elected to the Senate, came when he was only 12 years old. Quite a time to be joking, President Biden. During an Oval Office address explaining his departure from the 2024 presidential race, President Joe Biden said he, quote, is going to keep working to end the war in Gaza and to bring home the hostages, end quote. Kamala Harris will seek to express her independence from President Biden's position on Gaza without differing from it completely. Sources close to the VP told CNN. Harris will, quote, try to be clear with Netanyahu, end quote, and will not try to say remarks that please everyone. However, the White House today reaffirmed that there is no error, there's no distance between Vice President Harris's policy and President Biden's policies. I believe I might have shared yesterday as well, it has been reported that Vice President Harris's campaign received a sizable donation from AIPAC, which is a pro-Israel lobby. A day ahead of his meeting with Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago, Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump called for a quick end to Israel's war with Hamas and to secure the return of hostages, adding that Israel has to better manage its public relations. In an interview with Fox News, Trump added that for whatever reason, you have Jewish people out there wearing yarmulkes, and there you know, they're pro-Palestine. You've never seen anything like this. Vice President Harris condemned what she described as despicable acts of unpatriotic protesters and hate-fueled rhetoric at Union Station. I had already shared her specific message about that. Zairo Shakar Moore, the nephew of 79-year-old hostage Avram Mundar, met with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar hours after being arrested for protesting during Prime Minister Netanyahu's congressional address. After the meeting, Moore stated he was proud to be arrested along with his fellow family members of hostages, if that's what it takes to make clear that our families need a deal now. Omar stated in a statement saying that the courage my guest displayed today at the joint address was inspiring. He attended the speech with a ticket provided by Omar. Air Force General C.Q. Brown, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said on Thursday he still has not been able to see much from Israel about its day after plan once the war with Hamas ends. The bodies of 5 Israeli hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th were retrieved by Israeli forces on Wednesday and identified as Maya Goren, Israeli Staff Sergeant Oren Golden, IDF Staff Sergeant Tomer Ahmes, IDF Sergeant Brodsky, and Ravid Ari Katz. Negotiations between Israel and Hamas over ceasefire and hostage deal appear to be in closing stages, as senior U.S. officials said, adding that Netanyahu and Biden would discuss those in their meeting today. In the first phase of the deal, according to the official, women and men over the age of 50, as well as sick and wounded hostages, would be released over a 42-day period. The official said there's no agreement on how to proceed from phase 1 to phase 2. You'll recall, phase 1 is a temporary ceasefire. Phase 2 is a permanent and lasting ceasefire. Phase 3 is the reconstruction phase. The remaining obstacles are bridgeable. Officials from the US, Israel, and Arab states support the idea of appointing Mohammed Dahlan, a member of the Fatah faction and a former PA security chief, to govern Gaza after the war as a part of a day after plan, according to the Wall Street Journal, adding that Dahlan has presented himself as someone who could oversee aid distribution in a new Palestinian administration of Gaza, according to Arab and Hamas officials. The bodies of hostages, Alex Danzig and Yagev Bunstab, were held along with the bodies of 4 other Israelis, Yoram Metzger, Chaim Perry, Amram Cooper, and Nadav Popplewell, whose deaths were confirmed last month, the IDF said. A tunnel shaft in Han Yunis, where the bodies of hostages have been found yesterday, was located following intelligence received during interrogation from detainees from Gaza. The research on the location of the bodies of hostages in the area, the IDF and Shin Bet released in a joint statement. The Israeli forces are continuing to operate in Khan Yunis and Rafah and have attacked more than 110 targets in those areas, according to the IDF. The death toll reported from the health ministry in Gaza today is at least 39,175 Palestinians killed, and those wounded is at least 90,403 wounded. 3 Israeli soldiers were lightly and moderately wounded. I mentioned this drive-by shooting attack near Kalkia. The Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee announced the establishment of a special subcommittee that's examining the events surrounding October 7th and the Gaza war. And in a meeting with the heads of the northern Israeli authorities, the Israeli Air Force commander, Bar, said that the strike on the Houthi-controlled port was directed at the entire Middle East, both Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah and Iran, and the Air Force maintains the ability to respond if a war breaks out in the north with Iran. An IDF reservist who filmed the circulated footage from Wednesday night's rescue operation of the bodies was dismissed from service and sent to military detention for 10 days. The IDF announced the death of 2 soldiers, Ariel Topaz, 24, who was critically wounded in the car ramming attack, On July 14th, he's who I mentioned earlier, and Staff Sergeant Noam Joach, 19, who was killed in southern Gaza. One person was killed and 3 more were wounded in an Israeli airstrike on South Lebanon, according to a Saudi newspaper. And the Air Force struck Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon, while firefighting teams have extinguished several fires that broke out in North Israel as escalation and hostilities have continued between Hezbollah and Israel on the north border of Israel. A children's nursery in the North Israeli town of Shtula was struck by an anti-tank missile that was fired from southern Lebanon, but there were no casualties. And the Houthi attacks on Israel in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza will continue despite Israel's attack on the Houdadah port, the Iranian-backed group's leader al-Houthi said in a televised speech. Britain's new government is expected to drop the previous government's reservations on the International Criminal Court's request for arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Gallant, according to 2 sources that reported to the New York Times. That's the update for the last 24 hours. May we continue in our efforts towards peace. Amen.